My whole thing for becoming a pilot is back when I was 4, my story that I created, and it is 100% created by me as a child. I told myself a story that I've believed until just recently, that I needed to excel in everything I did and even go riskier to be the best. I had this story which I created. And so potentially I may not even have been a pilot if I hadn't created this story. My dad has never been up because he kept saying to me, when you get so I got my private license, he goes, when you get your commercial license. So when I got my commercial license, he goes, when you get a real job. So I was flying John Singleton in jets. No, when you get into an airline. So I flew for Rex. I think both. I shifted my boundaries, and also I felt that I had proven myself to others, but I'd also proven myself to myself that I was a good pilot.
Yeah.
I was an airline captain. I'd done the hard yards. I'd passed all the tests. I was to be considered the same as any other airline captain. And when I wasn't treated that way, I finally put my foot down and said, no, that's enough. I'm still that girl who colours in the lines, and to stop saying yes to everything. So that's been the hardest. Though I still look up at every aircraft that flies over. I get excited. I still have good feelings about it.
Hi, I'm Michelle Huntington, and I'm a former airline captain, now podcast host of Captain and the Clown, author of Lady MacGyver, keynote speaker, and I run workshops on anti-fragility, leadership and decision-making. I'm very excited to be here with Di.
I'm Di Gillett, and welcome to the Power of Women podcast. We're a platform that celebrates and showcases the strength, resilience and achievement of women from all walks of life. Now, I probably need to explain if you're actually watching this on our YouTube channel, and if you're not, I will task you to go and jump on because it's worth seeing. We are surrounded by balloons, the aromas of strawberry-scented cupcakes, because today the Power of Women podcast turns 1. And I want to thank all of you for listening and following the podcast, because it has been a monumental task getting this off the ground with a village. And I would like to thank Daryl Misson for the fabulous sound editing, Chocolate Studios for all of the studio availability that they have offered us, and to George Danikian being my personal coach. So thank you so much, George. Year 2, we're going to be bolder, brighter, and potentially just a tad more provocative. So stay tuned. Today, we're actually joined by a risk taker, as Michelle has already suggested. We're going to endeavour to break down how to pursue our challenges, push our personal boundaries, and develop a mindset that, Michelle, in your words, keep going until you can't. Michelle Huntington, welcome to the Power of Women podcast.
Thank you, Di, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
Very exciting.
And I got presents. So you have to jump onto the YouTube channel because Michelle came gifting presents. So it really is a birthday episode today. So thank you. Michelle, could we set the stage first and talk about representation? How many female airline pilots are there globally?
Globally, airline pilots are about 72,000, which sounds like a huge number. Female pilots, about 72,000.
Oh, it is.
But airline captains is only 500.
500.
So female pilots that work in the airlines, 72,000 odd.
Yeah.
And that equates to about 9% globally.
See, that puts it in perspective.
Yeah, and most airlines, especially here in Australia, we don't exceed 6% representation in each airline. But, airline captains, 500 in the world.
So Australia's under par at 6% against a global global standard of 9.
We are. Air India is actually the airline with the most amount of female
Who would have
pilots.
thought?
I know, that's right. So 500 female airline captains equates to about 1.5% of airline captains around the world.
So tell us about what it's like having spent a number of years in a male-dominated sector.
I didn't actually feel like it was a male-dominated sector when I was in it initially, because I was there proving to others that I could do the job and to people who were hiring, who had been used to hiring men. However, I was also proving to myself. So it was part of the journey. And I almost took it as a challenge. If there was a pushback because I was female, then I could outfly. I could do it better. I could do it bigger. And so I think
Spurred you on.
It did. It was a real incentive to prove them wrong. And then my colleagues, there was a lot of camaraderie, and so I felt like I was included in the club, and they stuck up for me. There was allyship definitely amongst the ranks.
Yeah, okay. So that's more positive than perhaps external perception might be, breaking into a boys' club, really.
Yeah, so this started early on when I was building hours to become an airline pilot. So how it starts, a little bit like when you learn to drive a car these days, you need to get so many hours in a logbook before they'll give you a licence. The same with flying.
Flying hours.
So once you get your licence, you then need experience before people will hire you. And so there's that catch-22 of how do I get experience if no one will hire me? And so I did some crazy things like bringing small aircraft over from the States and doing flying that others wouldn't necessarily do, but it meant that I got my hours
That
up.
sounds like a crazy thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you literally flew small planes over?
Yes. So
How many stops in a small plane?
Well, it was 5 days it would take, a single engine, one engine, and I had to put a big bladder of fuel in the back where the back seats were, and it was a 4-seater plane. And I would fly from the States, the west coast of the US, usually around Hollister, San Francisco area, to Hilo in Hawaii, then from Hilo to Kiribati to Pango Pango to Norfolk to Lord Howe Island, then to
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
How many boys would have done that?
There weren't many.
Yeah.
There weren't many. It was a bit of a crazy
Is that
thing to
solo
do.
flying?
It is, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So I only just had my private license, so it was a bit silly, but you
Ballsy.
know, I felt that the engine didn't realise it was over water, so I'd give it a
How
go.
about the pilot?
Yeah, well, that's you start to you don't think about it. You can't think about it because I was prepared though. I did do preparation. I wasn't completely crazy, and I went down to Nowra. There's a Hewitt, which is helicopter upset emergency training. So it's basically where they dunk you in a cage into a pool upside down and spin you round. And then you get out of that underwater.
So this is if you go down.
That's right, yeah. So I was prepared that way. I had grab bags. I had life jackets, life rafts.
You seriously wanted this career.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So was this a childhood dream to fly planes?
It was. My father was in the Air Force and we lived overseas. So I was a tomboy. I was the son Dad never had. And I would hang out at the Air Force base with him. And we were very lucky, giving my age away, back in the 70s, OH&S wasn't really a thing.
You're amongst good company. It's okay.
And they would let kids go up in military aircraft as joy flights. So I won a colouring in competition, got to go up in a Mirage fighter jet, and I was hooked. I loved
That's an interesting
the
connection. Colouring competition, Mirage fighter jets, the prize.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it was very cool. And I just thought, yep, I can do that, and didn't have the I suppose the exposure to limiting beliefs or limits on because of gender.
Yeah.
It was, I can do that. And my parents said, of course you can. And they encouraged my sister and I to do whatever we wanted, saying, you will have to get good marks, so you will have to study, you will have to put the work in. And so I did. It was only when I was in high school then that I was told, no, it's not a career option for a lady.
Yeah, there you go. Because if I think about confidence and identity, and if I think of the airline captain
Yes.
and anyone sitting at the front of the plane, I think of uniform, stature, authority. Was that actually what you portrayed as a kid growing up?
No, I was tall and lanky. I looked like a boy, so I was shy, painfully shy, and people thought I was stuck up. I wasn't. It was just I was shy and tall. I couldn't hide.
So often misconstrued.
Yeah,
Shyness
I couldn't make
for
myself
rudeness
small, and I tried, and then I developed like an alter ego. So anytime I had to be seen, I portrayed Wonder Woman was one of my favourites, and Bionic Woman on television. So these women were strong and they, just had the power pose. And so I thought, okay, I'll be Wonder Woman today. And that's how And
they were really our only role models growing up. There wasn't anything else that was portrayed powerfully as women. I can remember the Wonder Woman type
even Charlie's
action.
Angels, they were strong women and they were go-getters and they made do with what they had, and I think that's...
But you didn't recognise or associate yourself with them. That was your aspirational pin-up.
Yeah, so they provided inspiration and almost like an example of how I could get through it, how to get to the next stage.
Yeah. So what's the biggest misconception people have about you if you look today and reflect back on that?
So that my story defines me because
It does.
And that's what people have been like. They think, oh, you're a... And I'll tell you, I didn't realise this until when you're flying with other crew, it's a very small office and you spend days together. And you start to tell each other things about your life, often a bit like a hairdresser. You tell your hairdresser things that you would never tell your best friend or your husband or whatever. And this is the same with crew. And there's a joke, after sign-off, people don't talk to each other until they sign on again. So you tell your crew all this personal stuff and they tell you. And I'd been telling something about myself. And one of the crew members said to me, Michelle, everything bad happens to you? And I'm thinking, no, it doesn't. But then I caught myself that I'd actually been, because I'd been off work with breast cancer and I'd had twins and I was going through a divorce, which, yes, okay, if you say them all like that, there's some big things. But I realised I was starting to have that as a bit of a story. And I thought, I don't actually identify with that being a bad thing. It's just I've said it quickly. It's just your story. That's right. Yeah. And I thought, I can change this. I can change this narrative. So it was a good wake up. Yeah.
And is it a truly trusted space to be sharing that information with colleagues? There's a risk in that amount of sharing, one would have thought, if it lands in the wrong hands.
Yes, you do need to be careful about what you say and who you say it to. There is a cockpit voice recorder as well. So if something were to happen and they were to play the tapes, then there may be stuff in there, which is always the joke. I don't know if you know the Black Box series.
I do. I'm just thinking now I don't want you to find the black box.
Well, that's the thing. On those shows, they always had the crew, saying the checklists and talking very properly and sensibly and maybe a bit of panic in their voice. But if it was an Australian crew, I'm imagining they'd be beeping out all the expletions.
This effing plane's going down.
What the F did you touch? What'd you do? It wasn't me.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe there's a bit of post-production work on the black box. That's kind of extraordinary. Yeah.
But I had crew confide in me that they there was one particular captain when I was a first officer, and we were in the air, and he showed me a text message that he'd received from one of the cabin crew who were up the back on our aircraft, and she'd sent it just before we took off. And it was a photo that was, she wasn't wearing underwear, put it that way.
Okay.
And he said, "What am I going to do with this?" And I said, "Well, is your wife on the iCloud with you?" Because she's potentially received that text message as well. So it's then, you've got your beautiful wife, your lovely children. I would, as soon as we stop, give her a call.
Before somebody else does.
Yes, that's right.
So have you become a go-to person whenever there's an airline disaster or something for commentary, of which 2025 seems to have started with a lot?
Yes. So I've been very fortunate to be speaking with ABC Melbourne and Radio National. And because I ran a Fear of Flying course when I was in Virgin, there is a lot of fear that, especially with the media coverage, obviously, they sensationalise sometimes some of the things that are happening.
Married to the media, I get that.
Yes, and so people do get quite nervous about flying. If they were on the edge, this can send them over the edge because you don't know you're putting your trust in the pilots. And so I speak about what's happening, what actually happened, what the training is, whether it's normal. So some of the emergencies that we've had in Australia recently, the crew handled it brilliantly. They textbook. So if you're going to have something happen, Australia is a great place for it to happen because all the pilots are trained very well, very, very high standard in Australia. But all of this, we are, and the culture in Australia as well, the passengers. So if you're overseas, potentially that's not the same, But so we're very lucky.
So coming back to this nerdy kid, what was the metamorphosis from that nerdy kid to having the strength and temerity to fly a small plane across the world to then becoming an airline captain? What does that journey look like as a character transition?
I think I'd been told no. Any time I was told no, I accepted it growing up. And because I grew up in an era of being seen and not heard, always smiling, saying yes, people pleasing, if somebody said something to me that wasn't particularly nice, I would take on that and I would smile and bow my head. And then that night I'd be at home crying and in a corner. And I realised that people were going to keep doing it unless I stopped it. The only person who could stop it was me. So I was refused a bank loan to learn to fly when I went in, and they told me that women couldn't be pilots. So
what year?
That was in 1999.
Wow.
So it's not that long ago. To me, it doesn't feel like
no, it's not. It's not.
And
might be for some of our listeners, but it's not.
Yeah. And so I went home and thought, what am I going to do? Like, I could get some money together, but not enough. So I went to a different bank and I told a bit of a white lie. I didn't tell them it was for flying. I said it was to decorate my house. And they gave me the money.
It's a bit of a white lie.
But as long as I could pay it back, which I knew I could, I was good for it. Then, and I thought, well, they've got a narrative.
I don't think I could have sat and filled in that form and had that discussion. I don't think I could have kept my straight face, my poker face.
Well, it worked. They gave me the money. I paid up front and, I did the flying. I paid back the money.
And the house is still undecorated.
Well, I sold that house. I ended up having to sell that house that I was going to decorate that I told them I was going to decorate because I couldn't get enough money to pay for the whole lot up front.
So I'm just thinking for listeners, if we're trying to pass on pearls of wisdom.
Don't lie.
Well, I don't know. I think we're actually saying maybe it's the way to go. But hopefully 25, 26 years down track, that's not the same roadblock for a woman fronting up for a bank loan for a small business venture or pursuing something that's got a commercial outcome at the back end of it. All things go to plan.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Incredible.
So I had all the paperwork. I had a full-time job. I was working doing window dressing for R.M. Williams. You were a tomboy, weren't you?
You even chose your choice of retail.
That's it. Oh, it was great company to work for. But as soon as I got the money, I left the job and did full-time flying.
That's incredible. Well, Michelle, our journey's not finished talking to you yet. So coming up, I want to hear more about this amazing transition and also what you're doing now. If you're loving the Power of Women podcast, be sure to jump on to our YouTube channel and hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss an episode. So I'm sitting here, birthday present in hand, with a pre-release of your upcoming book, Michelle, called Lady MacGyver by Captain Michelle Huntington. And I know it's got you sitting, and I appreciate the cover is not final yet, but it's got you sitting here in uniform. But I understand you're not sitting at the front of the plane anymore. What can you tell us about that, to what you can release before the book comes out?
Okay, well, the book, so Lady MacGyver, what we were talking about earlier, the alter egos and the Wonder Woman, etc., that they were my idols who I looked up to. They gave me inspiration and an example to follow. The Lady MacGyver moniker I took on because in general aviation, which is when you're flying small planes, often there's not a lot of money behind it, and the aircraft aren't as well kept as what the airline, aviation, big airline aircraft are. So we would often have to make do with things that we had, not so much chewing gum and belly button lint, but close. And so I would always come up with things, other ways of doing things. So the book is on that journey. It's from when I began flying to when I exited and after. And I left during COVID. The airline I was working for went into administration and then they offered redundancies because the flying had reduced because of COVID. And I saw it as an opportunity. I'd been in aviation for 23 years. I'd been at that airline for just over 13 years. And whilst I didn't feel when I first started that the gender thing was an issue, it became an issue. And I think I evolved as well. I grew. And rather than putting up with things, which I had been not realising I'd put up with things, so innuendos, physical touches, I finally said no. And
Why do you think it became an issue after time? Or had you shifted your boundaries?
I think both. I shifted my boundaries, and also I felt that I had proven myself to others, but I'd also proven myself to myself that I was a good pilot.
Yep.
I was an airline captain. I'd done the hard yards. I'd passed all the tests. I was to be considered the same as any other airline captain. And when I wasn't treated that way, I finally put my foot down and said, no, that's enough. And ultimately, it was me saying no and stopping a flight because of it. And then the action that happened after that, the company not backing me, and I just thought, I've had enough. I don't need to do this anymore.
So did your career define you? 25 years is a long time for something that you had a burning passion to pursue, has already been demonstrated earlier in our discussion.
Yeah, at the time I didn't think so, but after, it definitely defined me. My whole identity was wrapped up in the pilot identity, and it was only when it wasn't there and I had a massive ego death and identity disruption. It wasn't just the role, but that's who I perceived I was. And everything about it. I spoke about flying. I did flying. I even worked on my days off flying. I missed birthdays and family events, Christmases, friends' weddings because, I might be rostered. I might have had some flying to do. And I tended to personify the company and the aircraft and worked rather, I was living to work rather than working to live.
Yeah. So what did you have to go through to create a disconnect between that? Because that's almost a death.
Yeah, it felt like that. And it sounds weird, but, butterfly chrysalis, how when it's a caterpillar, not saying that I'm a butterfly now, but it's really, really melting down. And I consider the timing to be perfect because COVID, everybody was inside, lockdown. We unfortunately weren't allowed to be very social. And so I had that opportunity to implode, melt down.
Behind closed doors.
Absolutely. I drank way too much though. I know I did, and I spent too much money online shopping and did all the bad things.
But I still know the delivery men by first name today, Michelle, so guilty as charged.
But yeah, it was an opportunity to just very, very slowly rebuild and, do the work, still doing the work on what it is, who I am. And every day I change.
So that's how you handled it. How do you think a man would handle the same scenario where his career had come to an abrupt halt?
Well, if it had been the incident, he wouldn't have handled it. He probably would have given a black eye. But so there would have been a physical altercation, I'd imagine. And he possibly would have fought a little harder for his role, his position. I gave up the fight because I didn't want it affecting me physically, emotionally anymore, spiritually. It was affecting my kids were home and, I was crying all the time. They might have been a little more stoic, a little stronger. I don't know. I know I do know former colleagues who would not have handled it well at all.
So after all of that, what's been the most challenging thing to unlearn in life?
That to stop being so compliant, so highly compliant. I'm still that girl who colours in the lines, and to stop saying yes to everything. So that's been the hardest. Rather, people ask me to do something, and even if I don't know how to do it, I always say yes, and I'll learn how to do it, and I do get it done. I think it's more giving myself a bit of a break now. It's the being kinder to myself and thinking about, what it is that maybe is best for myself and my family rather than helping a stranger across the street who... That's probably... And
that's a female character trait.
I think so. I still look up at every aircraft that flies over. I get excited. I flew down here this morning. I knew the crew, the smell, even the smell of the ovens and the smell of the aircraft. It's still, it was
sparks a reaction.
It does. Yeah. I still have good feelings about it.
So you talk about, and we'll touch on what you're doing now, but you talk about developing a mindset of keep going until you can't, which I think rocks. I love it. How does one do that?
What that means, so it did initially mean whilst I was flying, keep going until you can't, is it's not over until it's over. So keep fighting, keep going. So if you had an engine failure or something happen in the air, you don't just give up. You can't pull over on the side of the road. You have to keep going. So you don't give up. It's almost like kids when they're playing soccer, play to the whistle.
Yeah.
And that's what I meant by keep going until you can't. Now I'm also seeing keep going until you can't means it could be a day in bed is you keeping on going. You not answering the phone is you keeping on going until you can't. It's just whatever it takes for you to get through that day, that time, that minute, that hour, and then, you're ready for the next.
So tell us about what you're doing now, because you're applying that on the speaking circuit, talking to corporates, as I understand it.
Yes. So people have a romantic ideal of flying still, and it's a little bit smoke and mirrors. People aren't really sure what happens in the sky. You know, when we put the fuel in the wing, it's also a little bit of magic goes in there and keeps it up in the sky. So I speak to corporate groups and leadership groups because I was a captain. It's things that having to make decisions at 40,000 feet where you can't call a friend. You've got lives at stake. You're also managing people on the ground. You're in the air. You've got passengers. You've got, in an environment that you wouldn't survive if you were outside of the aircraft. So it's just how to either make the decision when to stop, when to react, when to tell people about it. They're the sorts of things.
There must be traits that come from that and from the setting of being in where you've got lives in your hands. Do you translate those traits into your everyday life and how you approach life?
Absolutely. The decision making, one of the big things is if you can't make a decision, you don't have enough information. And you shouldn't have to make a decision. And sometimes the decision is, I don't have enough information to make a decision, so I need to get more. You can get decision paralysis where even despite the amount of information you get, you just can't make it.
You get overload.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So there is a fine line, but often if decision-making matrix where if you can't go, yes, definitely that, or limit it to 2 or 3 options, then you don't have enough information. You don't know how long it's going to take to get there. And I also use communication. So as a captain, having to communicate with people from all walks of life, all nationalities, genders, and being able to be understood, ensure that I'm understood so that in the least amount of words, understand them and come at it from there in a very empathetic way to understand where they're at. And I use that these days as well.
And you're teaching organisations and others to do the same?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So to listen with, intent, or listen to understand rather than listen to answer.
So if we wrap all of this up into a final question today, what is a phrase that defines you?
I like this. So everything I've done has prepared me for now, and I'm not done yet.
And I like that. That's fantastic. So not done yet. Book release is when? When can we expect to see Lady MacGyver on the shelves?
Early August.
Early August.
Yes.
And if somebody wants to engage Michelle Huntington and have you speak to their organisation or their leadership group, how do they find you?
michellehuntington.com. We also, my partner and I also have a podcast. Nowhere near, as I was saying, nowhere near the beautiful professional setup that you have here. I definitely want pink balloons and a pink light if we do video. And that's Captain and the Clown, and it's leadership. He's a clown. I was a captain, hence Captain and the Clown. Or I'm on the radio.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Michelle, thank you so much. I know you have actually flown in to be here today, but as a passenger, thank you so much. And if you want to find Michelle, we'll also add those details into the show notes. And as we turn to, please continue to follow and support the podcast and subscribe on the YouTube channel, because that's really where you get to see the full array of what we're all about. Thanks for watching. Until next time.